Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather update as we have a slight risk with some tornado potential today, this afternoon and evening across portions of the North Carolina Piedmont up into south central Virginia as well. Here you can see that bright orange supercell that happened last night. This was just to the northeast of the Columbia, Missouri area, and this was a storm that was on approach southwest of Columbia that had those tornado warnings out closer to the Sedalia area. There is even a tornado report out there that was reported by an NWS meteorologist. I'm not seeing any confirmations of that tornado report yet. It looks like on radar that the mesocyclone was certainly ramping up. It looks like a bad situation for Columbia. And then it appears that maybe some slight veering of the winds there. Maybe that warm frontal zone, something thermodynamically, maybe an unfavorable ageostrophic jet circulation caused the middle mode to really not produce any tornadoes. And that was right over the 10% hatch area by the Storm Prediction Center. A majority of those tornadoes were northwest and to the southeast of that area. And it just goes to show you just how difficult some of this forecasting is. But we definitely nailed it in our morning weather briefing with identifying all of those different modes, the nocturnal mode as well in green. Here you can see the most damaging nocturnal mode that happened last night, and this shows that supercell that was approaching the Chester area there just after crossing, or this is on approach to the St. Mary area with that tornado just after crossing Interstate 55 here. Initially, it was a stovepipe, a pretty narrow tornado as it came into St. Mary, causing severe destruction down there as well. And then it crossed the Mississippi River and then widened on approach to the Chester area, even turning a little bit off to the right. Most of the worst damage is just off to the north of Chester. I know a lot of the damage hawks were out there sleeping in their cars trying to get that damage drone shot at first light. And I'm starting to see some of that damage coming in from St. Mary, Chester, and the north side of Fredericktown. You can see these bounded weak echo regions. Those are dangerous wedge tornadoes right there. Look at these holes right in the middle. You can see definitely some weak echo, bounded weak echo regions there, showing these destructive tornadoes happening, getting a little bit more HP as you go further southwest down the front. But this storm here caused a lot of damage and destruction. St. Mary crossing the Mississippi River and then Chester. There were some initial reports coming out last night that the fire department was flattened. That was some local media that was spreading some of that misinformation, and the fire department thankfully did not sustain total destruction. It looked like it was totally fine. Someone then posted a picture of that fire department showing that it was still standing up there, but lots of severe damage, vehicles thrown around, everything consistent with strong violent tornadoes here, and that's not surprising as that low-level jet increased to about 60 to 70 knots. 15 tornado reports total yesterday, and you can see these individual modes here. Interestingly, this northwestern arc did produce a couple of tornadoes. We went up near the Chillicothe area and noticed that that instability axis was really skinny and bulging up just on the east side of that surface low. It produced a quick bird fart tornado. First of all, there near the Solo area, just to the north of Solo, south of Hamilton. And then it looked like it was struggling, crossing into the stable air. New updrafts were developing on the southwest side of the other updraft. And that's usually a configuration for a storm that is struggling and moving in to stable air. But some of those, that last updraft that did develop over that warm frontal zone, there was a very narrow window as that supercell was crossing the warm frontal zone near Solo, and then also near Purdy as well. And that's what caused those tornadoes to happen. And you can see it even produced another one up there as well. 3 tornadoes produced by that storm as it was interacting with that warm frontal zone. And some of the videos look like it was in a stable environment as well. So dynamic piping, that low-level mesocyclone drilling through that stable layer near the warm frontal zone where you have those easterly winds enhancing very locally in a narrow zone of that storm relative helicity. But do you put all your eggs in one basket for that one cycle near Chillicothe that may or may not happen? Or do you drop south and play the numbers game for 4 to 5 supercells that are approaching that strong wind shear near central Missouri, near the Columbia area with 200 plus and increasing 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, and then should have positioned down to that southeastern mode, the nocturnal mode that finally materialized over southeastern Missouri into southern Illinois. But look at this area in the middle. No tornadoes out there, and that's what happens when you get those straight line photographs, critical angles that are a little bit too shallow to support tornadoes. We did have this one tornado report from that tornado warning that was approaching Columbia. Not sure about the validity of that report yet. Need to see a picture of that. That storm continued and it almost was tornado warned on approach to Bowling Green again to the north of St. Louis, where I saw a tornado in 2011 on April 19, a big tornado up there. But then down here, as that low-level jet increased, this was a pretty flat trough. And so the low-level jet was a little bit veered and kind of shunted off to the southeast of that surface low track, and the arc of the instability, greater wind shear, was down there. But sometimes those arcs, those little warm frontal zones, mesoscale accidents can happen. You can get those southeasterly surface winds up there. It can cross that warm frontal zone and squeeze out a tornado, even if it's on the stable side of that boundary. I've seen that happen with the Quinter 1 and 2 setups when you have a strong low-level mesocyclone that moves into the stable air, still capable of drilling through that shallow stable layer and produce tornadoes. And one of them was damaging, producing likely what looked like EF2 damage up near the Purdy area to the northeast of Chillicothe. And we dropped south and got on that bright yellow-orange storm as it was near the Columbia area, and then went southeast and then just missed that nocturnal mode, the tail end there as it passed into southern Illinois. But here you could see these the morning weather briefing did pick up those different modes quite well. We had that surface low track 3 to 5, 6 p.m., a little bit earlier up there, even some tornadoes getting produced a little later on. The pink area, that warm frontal zone, there were a couple tornado warnings up there with that preliminary mid-level batch of convection that was on the leading edge of that jet streak. That did have a couple of tornado warnings up there. And then the large nocturnal tornado threat that really panned out on the southeastern side of that, southeastern Missouri into southwestern Illinois there. The western part of that nocturnal tornado threat, I included that in the green mode, even though it's probably a different mode kind of between the northern and the southern mode. But really the RAP analysis showing that 250 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative felicity getting pinched down into central and southeastern Missouri as that trough was ejecting. Realized I either had to put all my eggs in one basket for that one cycle to the northeast of Chillicothe, or do I blast off to the southeast where there's going to be 5 to 6 different tornado producing storms and intensifying low-level jet down into that green area. But the longer you storm chase, the longer you realize that it is largely just a crapshoot out here. And you just got to show up and chase, and eventually you'll be in the right spot at the right time. So this is today. There is a slight risk across the Piedmont. You can see a large area of surface-based instability there to the east of the Appalachians, a convective line that's going to arrive by this evening that could have some embedded circulations within it. The Storm Prediction Center just added a 5% area that's really right over this area of non-zero 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative felicity. You can see those blue outlines there from the North Carolina Piedmont to the northeast of Charlotte up toward the Richmond area. That's the most favorable area in terms of wind shear. But really, there's not a lot of renegade prefrontal clusters of storms that develop. The models aren't showing a ton of those storms developing out ahead of that front. Kind of a late arrival of that skinny squall line off the Appalachians by the late afternoon and the evening. But I still think that there is going to be enough wind shear to get a couple tornadoes embedded within that line. And then we have the enhanced risk for tomorrow. And some of the models are showing potentially another nocturnal event out there. It does look a lot like that Clinton event, where most of the storms develop southwestern Oklahoma, move off to the northeast, and then you get a nocturnal tornado event. Low-level thermodynamics are incredibly impressive for tornadoes, as there is a lot of low-level stable air. But it does feel like one of those events that could kind of come together at the last second. Tomorrow morning, we'll probably see it come out. Moderate risk might be issued, and then those storms will come in out of the southern mode with that deeper moisture, maybe near the Childress to Shamrock area, moving into western Oklahoma. And then I think on Wednesday, down near the Alexandria, Louisiana area, as that trough ejects, maybe even down toward New Orleans, could certainly see some severe weather. But let's take a look at this trough. And it's not as favorable of a trough timing for Tuesday, but still is definitely some potential for some tornadoes. So you can see it does kind of have a neutral tilt, still a lot of flow on the backside. So this is still an intensifying system, amplifying system that eventually seems to have a more favorable shape down into the mid-south. So central, southeastern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, I think, could certainly be an active tornado event on the day after this. But here you can see this large-scale trough ejecting from the western U.S. This is the same storm system that was associated with that big rain, the bomb cyclone there out of the Pacific Northwest as well. Now is ejecting from the Mountain West and across Tornado Alley. It does have such a high amplitude that it does excite a pretty intense and large-scale low-level jet off to the east of it. Here you can see the 850 winds there as well. Hopefully I do have audio during this live stream here. But there you can see that large-scale low-level jet that gets going with a kicker system Tuesday, late afternoon and evening here. And it does look like there is a subtle 850 low that moves into western Kansas that could lead to a reinvigorated low-level jet here across western Kansas. But the better moisture is off to the south, the eastern Texas Panhandle into southwestern Oklahoma, kind of similar to that Clinton event. How the moderate risk was way to the north in western Kansas, but really the deeper moisture is better off to the south. And here on the NAM, you can see that late arrival of the moisture, slightly late, but slightly better moisture down here, western Oklahoma into the eastern Texas Panhandle. Not as good up into western Kansas, kind of those low 60s dew points, kind of the arrival of new moisture up there, even though you do have some pretty favorable wind shear within that environment. So I think we're going to be cutting it close as to whether there's going to be daylight tornadoes out here or if it's going to be a nighttime event. 65 dew points out in the eastern Texas Panhandle is usually more than sufficient for that tornado threat. This is at 0Z. And decent photographs out there, but the low-level thermodynamics are not good down there for tornadoes. Looks like elevated storms could be the norm there with that type of a sounding in the eastern Texas Panhandle. Big capping inversion. A lot of cool air here, so even though you do have some decent dew points, this low-level thermodynamics there, not necessarily supportive of surface-based storms, even though you do have a favorable photograph that's likely due to the decoupling happening here from the shallow, stable layer at the surface. Then you get that instability elevated just above the ground there. So that's not necessarily a very favorable sounding, but let's go over to the 3-kilometer NAM, see what it does with moisture. And it's not as good with the moisture. You kind of have these low 60s dew points, but the 3-kilometer NAM does try to fire a storm down near the Childress area again that could move in to southwestern Oklahoma near 0Z. But there is an enhanced risk down here. A lot of that is due to the nocturnal ejection of the system, but the tornado probabilities are about 5%. And that's because of these relatively unfavorable thermodynamics down here, the presence of a low-level stable layer as well. So I'm thinking that maybe Louisiana might be the play there. Alexandria, even further south, down toward New Orleans as well. This is the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI here by the 3-kilometer NAM. Let's take a look at what it looks like here in western Kansas. Not as much of a stable layer western Kansas, even though you've got 65 over 62. It's not as deep down there, but still not incredibly favorable low-level thermodynamics there. You do have a better photograph, though, across western Kansas that can't really see because my head is blocking it. But these favorable photographs only go so much. If you don't have a surface-based storm, it's difficult to get a tornado there. And this sounding is going to require a very strong low-level mesocyclone to drill through that stable layer, but it is possible. It does have a lot of similarities to that event on October 20th. Was it October 20th or 21st out there? Or excuse me, the 13th. Let's take a look at a sounding here, just to look at the low-level thermodynamics at 0Z and south. Oh, there we go. So there's some better low-level thermodynamics there. You don't have as much of a capping inversion. Southwestern Kansas, PDS tornado sounding here. So there we go. That is a pretty favorable sounding. Let's make it a little bit smaller here. I'm live right now just in the north of St. Mary. We're about to do a damage survey this morning here. Not a big fan of the damage, the dark side that these storms leave behind. I know a lot of people sleep in their cars and get those morning shots, sunrise shots of the damage. I like to do damage surveys just to get a storyline of the tornado, where it touched down. But really just seeing people suffering out there is not something that I want to see. If we do need to help after damage, of course, until emergency personnel get control of the situation out there. But there are so many storm chasers shooting aerial damage shots these days that really you can do a damage survey just looking online at that video. But here is a forecast sounding at 0Z, southwestern Kansas. That is quite favorable. Relative low-level, neutrally stable environment there, as you can see here. And then it The instability arrives with those steeper lapse rates just above, but neutral stability, static stability down there at the low levels, conditionally unstable type of a profile. Down here, right as far southwestern Kansas looks quite favorable. Oklahoma Panhandle into the far northeastern Texas Panhandle looks to be your best bet to get a surface-based storm. And there it is, surface-based instability. I think far southwestern Kansas is going to be the target for tomorrow. Let's see if the 3-kilometer NAM fires any storms. I don't think it does up there, but at least by 0Z. The exception being down near the Childress area. Looks like a couple little echo tops there trying to suggest that there could be convective initiation in the eastern Oklahoma Panhandle, northeastern Texas Panhandle by about 0Z. So it's going to be close down here. There's your storm right there. Far southwestern Kansas, Coldwater area out there, Liberal, just north of Beaver, north of Laverne, kind of this zone. And they also have convective initiation down into the eastern Texas Panhandle as well. Down towards Shamrock. There you can see that Texas Panhandle mode. So the 3-kilometer NAM does suggest convective initiation, southwestern Kansas down toward the Shamrock area. Looks like this zone is going to be the target area, maybe a little further north into the eastern Oklahoma Panhandle, far southwestern Kansas there. Could certainly be at risk. Oh, yeah. So this is why the enhanced risk is there, between about 7 and 9 p.m., maybe as early as 6. These are probably going to be some tornado warnings here, southwestern Kansas. And you also have this mode coming out of Childress into southwestern Oklahoma with the deeper moisture. You got an intensifying low-level jet out ahead of it. 50 to 60 knots out here. So I do think that there is decent tornado potential here, especially now that I'm finding some of those more favorable low-level lapse rates out here, far southwestern Kansas into northwestern Oklahoma. That region looks pretty favorable Tuesday evening for a tornado threat. 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative felicity, definitely not an issue. 300 plus 0 to 1 kilometer shear here across this target. Storms capable of drilling through that relatively shallow stable layer. Certainly does seem very possible up there across that target area. So the parameter space is quite favorable, and if you can find those areas where there is a little bit of surface-based instability, then I do think that that's going to be where the greatest tornado threat is going to be located. You do have big-time wind shear further north. If this system came out during May, we'd be talking about a major tornado outbreak here, and we might have a tornado outbreak anyway. There's your instability. So the low-level thermodynamics are going to be a little bit of a limiting factor. But I think just like that moderate risk we had with that nocturnal tornado near Clinton, I think we're going to see a similar evolution to this event. Right near sunset, supercells moving into a favorable kinematic environment for tornado potential. And then I think the next day down near Alexandria, Louisiana could be quite active. So it's going to be important to get a lot of sleep tonight. 2-day chasing ahead. And then I'll be back into the leaf peeping season again in the southern Appalachians. But there's your instability axis. Just for fun, looking at the significant tornado parameter. Showing that composite max there for potentially strong tornadoes over southwestern Kansas into northwestern Oklahoma. Definitely could be potential. Plains, Kansas, you remember that nocturnal event back in 2015 with that big wedge, able to get really close to it up there in southwestern Kansas. Looks real similar to that type of a setup. So I think it's going to be an active day tomorrow again. Storm chase mode activated once again here tomorrow evening. Yesterday, we did a great job with these briefings overall. Didn't quite execute the chase, or we would have had a drone flying circles around the tornado up there near that surface low track at about 3, 4, 5 p.m. Instead, banked on the northern edge of that nocturnal tornado threat. But the main event happened over southeastern Missouri into southwestern Illinois last night, late night. Lots of destruction, the dark side that these storms leave behind. Long road of recovery out there for towns like just Fredericktown, especially just to the north of Fredericktown, St. Mary, Chester, southwestern Illinois, Purdy, up along the surface low track. But I felt like we did a good job with the briefing. Just need to start executing, and eventually the deep meteorological understanding of these setups is going to win out. We're just going to start hitting every single setup once these outbreaks, once these tornado events start behaving and following the basic rules of physics and meteorology. Then you'll start seeing Dominator 4 intercept tornado after tornado. You just got to keep putting yourself in the notch. That's the key. You put yourself into the notch of these supercells over and over and over again. You show up, you chase fast, you have a deep understanding of the meteorology of these setups, and eventually it starts to play out over time. Kind of reminds me of poker back when Chris Moneymaker and those people were kind of dethroning all the long-time poker players that had such a deep understanding of the mathematics and the game of poker. It's just kind of over the long term, you start to see trends, start to see that understanding of the game and understanding of storm chasing start to play out. But you also just have to also enjoy the meteorology on the mesoscale and synoptic, the ejection of these troughs, the arrival of the mid-level clear slot, the elevated mix layer over top this moist warm sector, the quick ejection of it up there near Chillicothe. It became really evident just how fast the system was ejecting on the synoptic and the mesoscale. So you had to get southeast to be there for the main event. Or do you gamble and hang up there on the nose near the arc with that pinching off instability axis? It's almost like an occlusion on the mesoscale. When that low-level jet veers a little bit, gets pushed off to the southeast, and then the arc, the surface low, overshoots that instability axis a little bit. But if that warm front, if you didn't have all that mid-level convection early on, and that warm front was able to lift up north and go east-west right along that surface low track, you would have had many more tornadoes across that northern part of Missouri, and you also would have had the nocturnal mode. So you would have been talking about 30, 35 tornadoes at this event last night. So we're going to be heading west toward Oklahoma. I think Captain Vanover is going to stay out for another chase. He's dedicated to get that drone shot. So we're just going to keep going after it. And eventually we're going to get that shot of the Dominator FPV flying circles around the tornado. Proof of concept for our Team Dominator science mission for next spring with sensors, drones, ground-based probes, Dominator 3, which is not for sale, and Dominator 4 out there. So hopefully everybody enjoyed Storm Rising last night and that you didn't tune in if you're in the risk area, because it's more important to stay tuned, obviously, to those severe weather watches and warnings. And it just seems like every single time this show is airing, and there you can see looking north at that circulation with that orange supercell. That's a big RFD on the left side of the screen, bulging out on the south side of that circulation. There you can see looking due west at that RFD bulge. And it tried to produce a tornado on approach to Bowling Green, Missouri, certainly. So I'll keep you guys updated on the severe weather threat tomorrow evening. Never stop chasing.